Good morning. Good morning. It's Monday, the 15th day of November. Welcome to the program. This is Jamaica Live, and we're broadcasting on Bridge 99. I want to welcome you. Thank you for joining me today. And we go on until 2 o'clock, and a little after 1 o'clock, we're going to be linking with our sister station in New York, Irish Jam, so that we can connect with the many Jamaicans in that community who continue to maintain such a keen interest in what is happening back home and have a particular interest in the kind of matters that we discuss on this program. So I want to welcome you once again. We're looking forward to an exciting program today. We have had 18 general elections since we achieved universal adult suffrage in 1944. Every 5 years, sometimes a little earlier than that, but every 5 years or in a shorter time, a general election is held. A great deal of energy is pumped into those elections. A lot of money is pumped into those elections too. You know, it costs the government to hold and to conduct an election managed by the Electoral Office of Jamaica. It costs the government over $1 billion, spelled with a B, over $1 billion to conduct an election because they have to employ thousands of presiding officers and poll clerks. They have to print over 1 million ballot papers. They have to print thousands of instruction manuals for the people who are going to be working in the stations. And they have to print a range of other documents that each polling station has to have on election day. A lot more money is pumped into these elections by the political parties and candidates. They run advertisements, and advertisements are expensive. They canvass the voters list. They put foot soldiers out there to check on the voters list to see who is still here and who is likely to vote for them and so on. They spend a lot of money employing people to distribute voters' guides. As you know, they hold big mass rallies to drum up excitement, to nice up the place. And then on election day, they have to employ runners and they have to hire a whole heap of vehicles to transport voters to get out the voters. And yet, in spite of all of this, in spite of all of the money that is pumped into election campaigns, the number of people who turn out to vote has been declining steadily over the last 40 years. Voter turnout in Jamaica peaked in the 1980 elections, where more than 80% of the people who were registered to vote came out. Since that time, since the 1980s, the percentage of the registered voters who come out to vote has fallen down to below 50%. Last elections were particularly significant because the voter turnout fell to 38%. Some of that, I believe, was due to COVID, because there were people who were scared of, they wanted to avoid crowds. Because remember, at that time, the vaccines had not even arrived yet. So I believe that would have impacted. But the elections before that, the one in 2016, the voter turnout was 49%, I think. Interestingly, voter registration in Jamaica is very high. I looked at the numbers over the weekend. 98% of the people who are 18 years and over registered. They got enumerated. They went and got their ID card. They're on the voters list. But it seems that many of them get enumerated, get registered, not with any intention of voting. They want to get their hands on a voter ID card because that voter ID card has come to be widely accepted in Jamaica, almost as a national ID card. It has your photograph, has your name, full name, and so on, date of birth. And it comes in very, very useful. You know, when you go to the bank to cash a check, or when you go to Western Union to collect some money, or even to apply for a TRN, I believe you have to have your ID card. There are some countries that I know of. Australia, I know, is one. Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Singapore. Those that I can recall. There are some more. But in those countries, voting is compulsory. It's against the law not to vote. And if you don't vote, unless you have a specified reason, which is specified in the law, you can be fined. You know, you can be taken to court and you pay a fine. That's not the case in Jamaica. A registered voter here has the right to vote, but he also has the right not to vote. And in our case, you have more people increasingly, with every succeeding election, you have more people exercising the right not to vote than those who actually come out to vote. Now, let me point out as well that this is not peculiar to Jamaica. It is a worldwide trend. I mean, globally, back in the 1970s, the average voter turnout worldwide was 72%. That is now down to 64%. Within the Caribbean, of which we are a part, back in the 70s, average voter turnout was 77%. That is now down to 57%, a significant drop. And in the case of Jamaica, in the 70s, we were high. We were, in the high 70s. And we have fallen now to below 50%. People sometimes refer to this phenomenon as voter apathy. I'm not so sure about that. I'm not sure that that is an accurate description of what we are witnessing. Because the word apathy suggests that people are not interested. They're not interested in politics. They're not interested in elections. They're not interested in the outcome. I don't think that this is so, Just listen to the call-in programs and hear how animated they become. They have a point of view. They get worked up over public issues. They raise matters of public concern. That's not the behavior of somebody who is apathetic. That's the behavior of somebody who is very engaged in terms of public issues. Check the social media and see how, everybody has a view. Well, they look like everybody. They have a view. They want to express that view, and they want everybody else to hear the view. So it's not that they are withdrawn from the political process, if we regard political process in its broad sense. Watch the demonstrations. when they get worked up over something. We want justice. We can't take the bad road them no more. I mean, they get fired up. These are people who are active. They're activists in a sense. So I don't agree with this business about suggesting that this is voter apathy. You make a scandal break out. Everybody's onto it. Some vex, some defending what happened. I mean, they are engaged. So maybe it's not a case where they're not interested why they don't vote. Maybe it is a situation where they make a conscious, deliberate decision not to vote. Different people behave differently. You know, recently I observed the elections in the Bahamas. And in the Bahamas, the people take elections seriously. They vote. When they're vexed with the government in power, they vote them out. They're not staying home. They normally have a voter turnout over 90%, in the high 90s. It fell in these elections that were held recently. Again, I believe partly due to COVID. But also, remember they suffered serious damage from Hurricane Dorian 2 years ago. And it devastated two islands, the Grand Bahama and Abaco. And I believe that, and those people had to go somewhere else to catch. And many of them wouldn't have been able to get back to where they used to live in order to vote. So that in the Bahamas, high voter participation, high. I don't believe that they are any more engaged in public issues than we in Jamaica, but they react in a different way. Here in Jamaica, when people are frustrated, when they are dissatisfied, they simply decide not to vote. And it is not that they don't trust the electoral process. I don't hear anybody challenging the results of elections in Jamaica. I mean, we had turbulent times in the past, but we have developed an electoral system that is admired and applauded in many other countries of the world. So it must be something else. What is that something? And should we be concerned about it? What implications does it have for our democracy? One significant implication, of course, is that those who don't vote are surrendering their own interests and putting those interests in the hands of those who do vote. And most of those who make sure to vote are the diehards, the diehard Labourite, the diehard comrade. They vote every time, and they vote for their party. Come rain, come shine, no matter what. And you know, speaking as someone who has worked the trenches, the political parties and the political operatives and the functionaries, they know who the diehards are. In the past, what you had to do if you wanted to win an election, you had to bring out all of your diehard voters. But those were never enough to make you win. You needed to also get some votes from the people who are not diehards, the independent thinking voter. They are sometimes called the swing voter. And the trick to winning an election was to make sure that you were able to convince more of those independent voters to vote for your party than to vote for the other party. But increasingly, it is the diehards who go out to vote. You still need some swing voters, but not as much as used to be the case. So increasingly, it is the diehards who run things. The born Labourite and the born comrade. Their votes are already locked up for their party, and they love their party, and they will do everything to make sure that their party wins. But because so many others choose not to vote, the diehards are now in greater control of our future, of our hopes and aspirations, of our destiny. This is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be exploring the topic, our low voter turnout. What is causing it? What are its implications? And what can be done to turn it around, to increase it? And we hope to be talking with some people who have insights and experience in these matters. I hope you're going to enjoy the program today. When we come back, it's Jamaica Live on Bridge 99. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live, and we're on Bridge 99. And today we're exploring the issue as to why so many Jamaicans refuse to vote in elections. Less than half of the people who are registered to vote are turning out, and I'm talking about even before COVID. More than half of the people just stay home, can't bother, not going out. And we want to see if we can get a handle on what is causing it and what it means for Jamaica. I mean, if increasingly a smaller percentage of the people are determining who should form the government and which policies should be pursued, then that has serious implications, and we want to know whether or not this is something that can be corrected. And one of the people that we are anxious to talk with, my first guest today, and we will welcome him back because he has been on Jamaica Live before, is Mr. Don Anderson from Market Research Services, who has considerable experience in political polling, doing surveys of political views and perspectives and political behavior. And I'm sure that he will be able to help us to understand precisely what is happening in terms of our low voter participation phenomenon. Don, are you on the radio? Are you on the line?
I'm on the radio, Bruce. Thanks for having me on your program, and and to all your listeners, I'm happy to be on your program.
Well, I'm glad you're able to make it. Help us.
Okay.
Our voter turnout has been declining pretty steadily. One might even say precipitously. Certainly in recent years. In terms of the surveys that you have done, I'm sure you would be able to develop a sense. What is driving it? What is causing it?
Okay. So maybe we could look at the magnitude of the problem, and I'm going to give you two extremes. So in the 1980 election, of course, the voter turnout then was 87%. All right? At a time when we had 990,000 persons registered to vote. So the voter turnout was extremely high, and that's the peak. It's the highest we've ever had in the history of our elections. If we fast forward to 2007, we fluctuated between 1989 and 2007. But in 2007, our turnout was 61%.
61?
No, 61.4.
Yeah, okay.
Right? Against a voter registration of 1.3. So the voter registration numbers are going up significantly. People are, becoming more and more interested in registering to vote.
To get the ID card.
Well, that's one of the reasons. In 2011, our voter turnout fell to 52%, as against the voter registration of 1.6, up from 1.3 in the previous election. In 2016, our voter turnout was 47.7%, against a registered number of 1.8 million. So each time we get into an election, the number of voters registered increases significantly. Now, in the 2020 election, conducted under COVID conditions, our voter turnout was 37%, and that's the lowest it has been in the history of our voting. All right.
Would you? So I don't know if you've gone back into the field, but from your own experience,
yes,
How much of that 37, that decline to 37, you would attribute to COVID?
I would say that it contributed. I don't think it was 50% of those who did not vote. All right, but it did contribute. I mean, when we did polls, we did a lot of work in the 2020 election, and we came up with the same kinds of reasons why people didn't want to go to vote. And COVID was one of them, but it did not factor as the most important reason by any means.
What are the reasons you've been finding out there?
All right, so over the years, we have plotted this situation very, very carefully. And I'm going to list you about 10 different factors that people have identified consistently, some more than others, as to the reasons they don't go to vote. And too much corruption in politics. One, this is not necessarily in order of the magnitude or the importance of each. No difference between the parties. So people are saying, well, we're going to go out to vote when I really don't see no difference between the parties. Okay? None of them performing effectively is another reason. Have no confidence in them is another reason. And let me tell you how we get this information. When we ask people, are you going to go to vote? Yes, no. Those who say no, they're not going to go to vote, we then drill down and we say, well, what are the reasons why you're not going to go to vote? And there's another question we ask, which is, what would make you want to go to vote, or what could encourage you to go to vote? That's another issue. So I'm giving you the reasons why people say they're not going to go to vote. Politicians make too many unfulfilled promises. People will not benefit. Same thing as the following one, which is none of them helping the people. All politicians are the same. Politics too dirty. And I'm going to raise two more, or one more. Fear and intimidation. That has been something that has dogged our politics for a while. I think it probably is less so now. It is not factoring as one of the more important reasons now.
Yeah, I thought that had receded.
It has receded. It has receded. But it is still coming up as a factor, okay? So too much corruption, no difference between the parties, none of them performing effectively, have no confidence in them, to make too many promises, unfulfilled promises. People will not benefit. None of them benefited people. All politicians are the same. Politics too dirty, and fear and intimidation. So those are the prime factors. But something has cropped up. Something has, in a way, crept into our system in the last maybe 2 or 3 elections. And that's the transactional nature of politics.
The vote buying?
The vote buying. I don't think it has ever been absent from our politics, but what we're finding more and more, not only in Jamaica, but we've done a number of elections in the rest of the Caribbean, and it's coming up as well, that there's a significant degree of vote buying, which nobody will admit to. Some do, quite frankly, because we have done a separate survey which asks, have you been approached to actually vote with a return of some money? And some people admit it, a lot of people won't admit it, but we're getting the anecdotal information as we go about debriefing our interviewers and so on, and it is clear that this is a factor that is coming out now. It also works to prevent people from going out to vote, because there's the transactional nature which says if you don't go to vote, you can get X, Y, and Z. All right? So all of these factors are playing a very important role in depressing the numbers. And in the 2020 election, COVID was an additional negative, but was not the most important factor.
I've always wondered, you see, when you pay somebody to vote,
yes,
how you know who to vote for?
It's a big question, which is why I think the whole approach now is paying them not to go to vote, because I think they have more control over that aspect of it.
Yes.
I gather that what has been done is that, people have been bus loaded out of communities on the day of election to make sure they don't vote, for a fee. I get all kinds of information coming back at me, and most of them are empirical data, some of them are anecdotal data.
The question I want to put to you, should we be concerned about it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, when you have a 37% voter turnout in an election to elect a government that's going to run the country for all the people, a lot of people don't feel that they are committed to actually, doing anything and being good citizens, because, as far as they're concerned, this particular government or whichever government is not really a national government. It's a I don't want to use the word minority government, but it certainly is not reflecting the wishes of the majority of the people. And it's a very serious factor. It's something that if we don't cauterize it, it's going to be a huge challenge for us going forward.
There's a paradox that I find, and I alluded to it at the beginning,
Yes.
where there was a time when people did not have confidence in our electoral system.
Yeah.
I get a sense, you can tell me what your view is, that people no longer question the integrity of the system. Certainly not to the extent that obtained in the past. But yet they
Agreed entirely.
but yet they still have no faith in the outcomes of the elections, you know?
Exactly.
They may have faith in the process, but not in the outcome.
Exactly. Nowhere in the data that we have is there any significant mention of the system as a factor in the low voter turnout. It's all about the parties, it's all about the politicians, it's all about the fair, it's all about, those things. Nowhere does it factor significantly. All right. So that there is a belief and acceptance that the system is working perhaps as best as it can, but that, the letdown is in terms of what they think they're going to get as a result, and that's a very important factor. What we probably find also is that the younger persons have always been the ones disinclined to vote. All right. And
that's not peculiar to Jamaica, is it?
It's not peculiar to Jamaica. Mm-hmm. What is interesting to note is that in terms of the core support of the respective parties, the PNP generally had a larger, older voting sort of segment. And I think what is happening is that,
that's a reversal of what it was 40, 50 years ago.
Yes. But in the last 20 years also, they have been able to attract a larger, in other words, their core support. When you ask people, and this is something maybe drilling down a little bit beyond what you really want to find out. When you ask people in terms of their support for one party versus the other, the PNP generally has a larger core support of persons who vote because of loyalty. All right? And they tend to be older. All right? What you're finding now is that younger persons are talking more about politics, and because of social media, there's a considerably increased level of interface with politics amongst young persons. But again, I've done some survey amongst the 15 to 17-year-olds, 17-year-olds to 20-year-olds. A significant percentage of them talk loud but don't vote. And I think there's not enough buying for the persons who are coming more on stream, which would feed into the notion that a lot of people are getting their voter registration card for other reasons apart from going out to vote.
Could one of the factors be that politics has now moved beyond the sort of ideological conflicts that defined, the 60s and 70s?
Yes.
To the point where political parties are now left almost without an ideological mooring.
Right.
And in other words, what is there to cause somebody to be interested in voting and to be interested in the outcomes because they believe in certain things? I mean,
right.
This seems to be one of the things that is missing.
Yes. I mean, when you look at some of the reasons that were mentioned, no difference between the parties, hence there's no ideological difference, None of them performing effectively. They see parties as the same, whether it's on the basis of ideology or whatever, they see parties as the same. So what is it that's going to make people go to vote? And we've actually asked that question. And, I come back to a point that I make consistently, and I don't know if anybody's listening to me, but politics is about marketing and not about politics. And I make the point because it is really a product that a party has that they want to get to a group of people who then they want to buy, want to get them to buy as much as they can. But you have to first of all find out what is it that people really want and how do they want it and how can you deliver that. And I don't think that is being done well enough. So when it comes around to elections, there's not enough buy-in from the public, the voting public. And because of the perception that there's no difference between the two, there's a significant degree of voter apathy.
Is there any
voter apathy.
Is there any unreasonableness in people's expectations? And maybe to what extent have politicians themselves been responsible for creating those unreasonable expectations?
I think that the expectations have been lessened since around about 2014, 15 there. But I tell you why. We also do the business and consumer confidence surveys, and we've been doing this from 2001.
We lost him?
Eh? No.
Sorry. I was the word. I had lost you. Yeah, go ahead.
No. Oh, I'm saying we've been doing the business and consumer confidence surveys from 2001. 21 years or 20 years of consistent data, quarterly. If you look at the confidence surveys and the index and the pattern since 2001, you will see that in 2002 there was a huge spike. In 2007 there was a huge spike and immediate fall off. In 2011 there was a big spike and immediate fall off. From about 2012, the spikes have not been there. And we translate that based on all the data that we have to mean that there were significant election promises that were not fulfilled. And therefore, shortly after, there was a huge hike in consumer confidence expectations. Shortly after the election, it fell off. That happened in 2007 to 2011, all right? But after that, the expectations did not create any of that spike. And from 2012 to 2021, you don't see that kind of huge mountain.
Is it that they're not prepared to be spiked anymore?
Well, this is the thing. I think there's a growing maturity in the electorate as well. And I think the electorate is also becoming more issues focused. We've seen that data, people becoming more issues focused. But not enough people are being, in a way, marketed to on the basis of issues. So there's a lot of personalities involved in the whole process. So
go ahead, finish your point.
So they vote for somebody because they like him, they know him, and they think he's a good man or a good woman, and but more so, the electorate is becoming issues focused, and I think that's the reason why, because there's no ideological difference or no perception of ideological difference. We find that people are kind of blasé about who they're going to vote and whether they're going to vote. And a lot of them don't think that anything is going to happen that's different, especially amongst the young who are becoming more and more part of the electorate.
What can we do to turn it around?
I think a proper scientific study has to be done. And I have in front of me a proposal that was submitted on the request of the electoral office for a study on voter apathy. I have a lot of data accumulated over a period of time. I think what's important is really to try to find out. It's not a pitch for work. Anybody. They would need to find out exactly now what are the operating factors. How many people are prepared to go to vote? What are the factors that would encourage you to go to vote, and why would you not want to go to vote? I think it is imperative that something like that be done.
Don, I was in the Bahamas recently to observe their elections.
Yes.
I find when I interacted with people there, I hear the same kind of sentiments that you hear from people in Jamaica.
Yes.
But in the Bahamas, when they get vexed, when they are dissatisfied, they make sure to vote.
Right.
They don't disengage,
Well, let me just tell you that we did a considerable amount of interviews in the Bahamas in that particular election earlier in September. All right. And we probably did more in one polling thing than we did in several in Jamaica, because we were able to interview close to 4,000 people over a 3-week period in the Bahamas leading up to that election. The difference in the Bahamas is that prior to 2017, voter turnout was in the 80s, 85, averaging 85. Why? Because you didn't have continuous registration. When you call an election, people registered and went out to vote. So when you register, it's because you're going to go to vote. So the voter turnout was in the 80s average. In 2017, they instituted continuous voter registration.
Yeah.
And that date voter turnout was about 60%. So people are saying, boy, that's low. That's twice what Jamaica is almost,
Yeah.
Right? So that you have to take it in context, right? But I did a lot of work in the Bahamas, as I did in Turks and Caicos in January or February this year. Yeah.
Don,
interesting data.
I want to thank you. Thank you for coming
My
on.
pleasure.
Because it is helping us to understand this phenomenon,
Yes,
perhaps what we need to be seized of it.
Absolutely.
In terms of how we respond to it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Good. All right.
Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. And we're very, very pleased to be joined now by another polling expert, someone who has considerable experience in identifying and measuring political attitudes and political feelings. And that's Mr. Bill Johnson. I want to welcome him to the program. Bill, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you, sir?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Good. We're talking today about the consistently low voter turnout in Jamaican elections. And we're trying to see if we can get a firmer handle on what is the cause of it, what are the implications for us going forward, and is there anything that can be done to turn it around, or it is something almost like COVID that we're going to have to make up our mind to live with? What's your take?
Okay, well, I think you really have to look behind the numbers. And if you go back the last 4 general elections, the average PNP vote was 433,000. The average JLP vote was 414,000. And then, of course, in the last election, the JLP got approximately 409,000 votes, the PNP 306,000. So that, everybody's talking about how the percentage of the vote vis-a-vis registration went down to around 37% in this past year. But the bulk of that was disaffected PNP supporters. I mean, I've just been looking at the figures, and I don't think anybody has really picked up on this, but from 2011 to 2020, that should be called the decade of the JLP, while the PNP has really disintegrated. I mean, in 2011, it had 464,000 votes, and 2020, 306,000. So I know there are some macro elements that are involved, I think, in terms of the reducing or the troublesome, relatively troublesome small numbers of voters. But I really think a lot of this is just the PNP basically disintegrating in the past decade.
Well, it's interesting what you're saying to us. Let me put a question to you, because I'm looking at the numbers now, and I made a point earlier that there seems to be a very high level of voter registration, but I believe a good portion of that is driven by a desire to get hold of that voter ID card because it serves so many other purposes. To what extent are the numbers confusing us a bit, because in the past perhaps you didn't have that high level of voter registration? What you're ending up now with is a situation where I believe 90% of the eligible people have registered to vote. So you're dealing with a bigger number from which you are trying to determine voter response in terms of coming out to vote for election. Would that be a factor?
Oh, yes. I mean, after the last election, I called it a post-mortem poll for the Observer, so I can discuss these results because they were publicized. But we asked people why they didn't vote in the last election. And ironically, 12% said they didn't vote because they've moved from where they were originally registered from.
Oh.
Another 8%. Another 8% said that they had to work on election day.
What about COVID?
8% overall mentioned COVID. Ironically, 12% of those who had previously voted for the PNP mentioned COVID, compared to only 6% of those who had previously voted for the JLP. But by and large, the biggest reason was just no longer interested in politics, and that was mentioned by overall 34%. But I do think these registration lists are swollen. And, The other thing we have to take into account is I really think the number of patriotic Jamaicans, for lack of a better word, is slowly decreasing as a percentage of the population. The surveys that I've done indicate that anywhere from 40 to 45% of Jamaicans over 18 would like to migrate. And when you have almost half of the voting age population wanting to migrate to another country, that's not really much of an incentive to get these people to come out to vote. I mean, what they're waiting to do is, they're waiting to hear from the U.S. Embassy or the Canadian Embassy or the U.K. Embassy in terms of, their green card. They're getting their green card or they're getting permission to migrate. We lose in Jamaica about 20,000 people a year recently for migration. So that just from 2016 to 2020, Jamaica lost about 80,000 people, assuming this 20,000 is sort of an average, who are no longer with us. And that's obviously these people, for the most part, are, from the prime voting age. So I think that's another thing that we really don't look at enough in terms of the reason for these relatively poor turnout.
Tell me, what do the demographics of the refusers, what do the demographics look like? I know in the past, as a political functionary myself, it was significant among the younger age group. I would say anything under 30. It was the hardest thing to get them worked up. Is that still the case, or is that now going into the higher age brackets?
No, that's still the case. I mean, ironically, those, and of course, that's the age group that want to migrate more than other age groups.
Yes.
And the other thing is, the JLP has done a much better job with their social media in terms of appealing to the younger people than the PNP has. I mean, that was another thing that came up in our post-mortem poll. About 70% of JLP voters were following the JLP on social media, compared to about 40% of the PNP voters.
We're talking earlier when I was on with your colleague and competitor, and he mentioned the question of transactional voting. Is that something you have picked up as well? That there are people who are now, they have a price on their votes?
Yes.
How big of a problem is it?
I think in some areas, it certainly isn't a universal problem across Jamaica. And I think there is some of that, but based on my experience in other Caribbean countries, it's not minuscule, but it's not as much of a factor as it is in some other countries.
To what extent, Bill, are people not voting because they are disillusioned, dissatisfied, disgusted? But that disillusionment and that disgust may derive from unreasonable expectations that could never have been fulfilled in the first place. To what extent would that be the case?
I haven't measured that exactly, but this is something that I've been saying since I arrived in Jamaica over 20 years ago. And that is that with so many people now watching TV from the U.S. or the U.K. or Canada, people's expectations, I think, are just growing. They say, well, my God, why can't I be doing this? Why can't I be doing that? And I really think that's one of the factors here.
And of course, in election campaigns, the politicians pump a lot of oxygen into those expectations.
Oh yes, a chicken in every pot and 2 cars in every garage.
Yeah.
As they said in the United States almost 100 years ago.
What can we do to turn it around?
I've been thinking about this, and I really think there has to be more of an esprit de corps among for the average Jamaican. I mean, I'm a Jamaican, I guess you would call me, but
Hello.
I think my feelings for Jamaica are stronger than a lot of Jamaicans. I mean, there's so many good things about the country, and I don't know if the average person is aware of them. But until people want to stay in Jamaica and they don't want to move or migrate, I think this is going to be an issue.
But what is it that they are demanding that they feel is not only not being delivered, but will never be delivered? Is it the quality of government? Is it economic opportunity? Because even in times when there seems to be some expansion in terms of economic activities, social programs, and so on, it's not translating into any improved voter participation.
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, when we asked people why they wanted to migrate, why they would migrate if they had the opportunity, almost 3/4 said for better opportunities. Another 8% said living here is too hard. Ironically, crime was only mentioned by 3%. Now, this was done a couple of years ago, but this particular survey.
One of the things that perplexes me is that I've encountered some people who can't complain about lack of opportunity. They are doing quite well. They've worked hard. They're doing well. They're stepping up in life. But when you ask them, you're voting next week? No, sir, I don't do that. Why? You are the expert. You are supposed to tell me.
I wish I knew. I mean, they come up with more ways to say, I'm too busy.
Yeah.
I have no time. I'm too busy.
I don't know. I mean, I hope I'm not disparaging when I say that. Well, you alluded to it earlier. Maybe their level of investment in Jamaica and Jamaica's future is low.
I think that's what it is. I mean, which is obviously a very unfortunate thing for the country.
Yes. Yes, but it's something that, well, it's a worldwide trend, no? I mean, if you look across the globe, I don't think it has been as precipitous in other parts of the world as it appears to be in Jamaica. But it has to be a cause for worry when you have more people who don't participate than those who do. And that's where we are now, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Well, particularly with the last election.
Yes.
I mean, almost a third of the people basically participated.
How much lower can we go?
If I wanted to...
What would be... Yeah, sorry, Bill, I'm interrupting you.
I was going to say, if I wanted to be a smart ass, I'd say, well, how much worse can the PNP get?
Yeah.
But I won't say that.
But at some point, I mean, there are people out there, PNP and JLP, who are the base of the party. No? Their loyalty doesn't wane. How close are we to a voter turnout that only consists of those?
Well, I think as far as and I don't mean to be harping on the PNP, I'm just looking at the numbers. But as far as the PNP, I don't know how much lower they can get. I mean, 300,000 people voted for them in the last election. I mean, in 2011, 465,000 voted for them. I mean, they've lost 160,000 voters, which I don't know. I mean, obviously, these historical trends tend to, come back and reverse themselves over time. But I mean, I don't know if I'm young enough to be able to see the next trend coming.
Yes. Well, I can't tell you that you have brightened my day because you have laid it out. But I think it's important that we understand it before we can even begin to figure out what to do about it.
Yes, I think that's the important thing. I mean, until we acknowledge it, we can't do anything to fix it.
Yeah. Bill Johnson, thank you very much. Thank you for joining me today. And thank you for, adding some value to our discussions. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, sir. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. In a few minutes, we're going to be linking up with Ira Jam in New York. It's actually just approaching 2 minutes after 1 o'clock. Old habits die hard. I was talking about the noon break. Stay with me. We're talking voter participation today. Trying to see if we can understand why so many people not voting. Why so many people can't bother vote, refuse to vote. Because we are now in what many people believe. We are now in a dangerous area where you have more people who don't vote than the people who actually come out to vote. And somebody we're going to be talking with now who I know is going to be able to give us a helpful perspective because he has done a considerable amount of work on this particular subject and in fact has published on this particular topic. And that is Dr. Lloyd Waller, who is a professor in the Department of Government at the University of the West Indies. Dr. Waller, do I have you on?
Yes, I am. I'm here.
Good. I'm glad you're able to join us.
Mm-hmm.
Why so many people don't want to vote?
For the most part, I would say, based on data that I have, I mean, I just actually asked persons about voting in the last election, most recently. But for the most part, it has to do with political apathy on one hand, the feeling that, you don't want to participate, you're turned off from politics and you don't want to participate, and also political efficacy, which is the view that your voice does not make a difference. So on one hand, you're turned off from the entire different aspects of the political space, whether it's the assumptions or perception of corruption, or perhaps it could be a situation whereby you felt as though you've lost confidence and trust in a member of parliament because they have not delivered something that they promised to you or to the people in your constituency or to the country.
So tell me then, where do they direct their passion? Because you certainly can answer that they are disengaged. Mm-hmm. I mean, just listen to the call-in programs. Go on social media. I mean,
right.
Every issue of public concern will attract, a view, a criticism of that view. They are engaged, but
the problem is that you do have quite a number of persons who are engaged, who do talk about politics, who are political animals. And for the most part, many of these persons tend to, would make up that group of persons who let's just say roughly 40% of those persons who are diehard voters. Like you have some persons like myself, regardless of how I feel on the day, I know beyond the fact that I'm participating in an activity, in my mind also I'm participating in an activity that is a demonstration of democracy, of freedom, of struggles, but not everybody sees it that way. And yes, you will have the persons calling in. Yes, you'll have the persons making the comments on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and you have the collective conversation. But that just represents a fraction of the population. For the most part, there are a lot of persons, especially the younger persons. And remember, we have a very young population in Jamaica now. They just generally feel turned off by the political space, by the political actors, and they're turned off because of what they see or what they hear.
You mentioned the word efficacy.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent? Well, you actually spelt it out that people feel that their vote don't really matter.
Right.
Is that a justifiable argument? Is that a reasonable? All things taken into consideration, is it a fair position for people to say that look, it doesn't matter if I vote? If I vote for a change, the change doesn't come. If I vote to vote out a particular party, the other party is going to come and do the same. I'm just trying to see if I can understand,
All right.
I'm trying to see if I can understand the powerlessness that people seem to be expressing.
So it's usually based on individual personal relationships and experiences that individuals may have. For me, as I said, my knowledge of the importance of the voting process is what drives me to vote. But I can't say the same for someone who had a conversation with yesterday, whose response was, and this is a different conversation, but I took note of the fact that the person did say that they're not voting again because they've been disappointed. They voted for the first time. It's a young individual. They voted for the first time. They had expectations, and their expectations were not fulfilled at both the constituency level and at the national level. And of course, different persons have individual reasons why it's not being fulfilled. Now, I think, and this is anecdotally speaking now, that the articulation of what the outcomes of an election is normally presented in the manifesto and in the utterances, and people do have a view, and they are desirous of some of what the promises that people are making. But after a period of time, and when you realize or you believe, that the promises were not fulfilled. And in some instances, because I'm even talking to you, I'm looking at the data, I'm seeing words here about politicians being dishonest. I was tricked. So there's a confidence issue and a trust issue at play that persons just generally feel it doesn't make any sense that I get up and vote because it's my view is not going to make here. But the last time didn't make a difference. So with each experience you have, your desire, your passion for politics, your trust and confidence in the politician wanes, and each year, each election, it just becomes less and less of something that you want to do because you do not see yourself getting anything from it, and you do not see anything, your family, the friends, the community, the country benefiting from it.
To what extent, or maybe how widespread, is the transactional behavior? I mean, for example, and I come across people like this. Somebody said they're not voting because they want a house and they didn't get a house.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be unimpressed by the fact that a lot of people did get houses because more houses were being built. Mm-hmm. Or they wanted a job. They've been trying to find a job and they can't get a job. But, Statin may tell you that, 100,000 new jobs were created over the last 2 or 3 years, whatever. Right. So people are getting jobs, but I didn't get mine, or I didn't get that house that I want, and therefore I am not voting.
Yeah, and that speaks to anecdotally again to what I refer to as the 99% principle, and I'm sure you must know as a member of parliament yourself, you help an entire community or persons in a community 99% of the time, but that one time that you say no is the time that you are actually demonized, and sometimes that just that one time that is the turn off, the bitter taste in person's mouth to be able to vote again. And of course, that particular individual, if they are a village, one of these persons who are popular in the village, they become advocates of not voting for you. So their views are also taken into consideration by others who hear the stories of you being, not you in particular, but of course the member of parliament being mean, being dishonest, not following through on his or her promises. And again, over a period of time, just the trust, the confidence degrades and the interest degrades. And over a long period of time, as we are seeing now, the participation is just becoming less and less and less by individuals in an election.
How much of a threat, how much of a danger is this to our democracy? Is it something that, fine, it's not desirable, but it's not fatal, or is it something that could? Well,
there are some schools of thought that will say it is fatal, because as you know, voting is the epicenter, is the aspect and demonstration of a democracy, and a political party is the ultimate form of political participation, because this is a process that allows you as a citizen to be able to have a voice. Perhaps it's the only time you really have a real voice to be able to decide the future of a country. So it is very fundamental. It is very important that people have an understanding of their role as a citizen, and that even though they may feel turned off by a particular political party or an individual, that the process, that rather than staying home and saying, I'm not going to do anything because I'm turned off, you have to actually act. Part of the action, but we're shifting more now into the solutions part of it. Part of the action has a lot to do with how persons are socialized to think about politics. We've allowed the group as an agent of socialization. When I say the group, I mean the individual who is turned off by the politician who now becomes an advocate for not voting. We've allowed these people to become advocates because the family as an agent of socialization is preoccupied with many other things. So the voting is not something that is a priority. It's not a bread and butter issue for some families, especially in working class spaces. Certainly the school doesn't necessarily have that curriculum. At the University of West Indies, we do have several courses in political science that articulate the importance of voting. But civics is in countries such, for example, New Zealand and other countries, civics plays an important role in helping young people. Civics, starting from the primary level, actually, in helping people to understand democracy and governance, democratic governance generally, and their role as a citizen, their right as a citizen to participate at this level, and for them to look forward to this moment that they actually get to have a voice in the democratic structure of their country and the future of the country. And the solution will have to be more civics, Mr. Golding. We will have to try it, and not just at the high school and primary school, the primary and secondary school level, but also at the community level as well. The Governance Society in the Department of Government is a good example of a civics program that has worked and has contributed to our students in the Department of Government, but also the high schools that have formed Governance Society groups to participate. And every group, every Governance Society group, every young person, regardless of the political party, they participate. They look at the issues, they evaluate the issues, they look at the options, they look at the track record of the particular party and the individual. They look at how much of the manifesto, which is a great marketing tool of our political parties, how much of the manifestos they are implementing. So we need to move to that level.
How many people read these manifestos?
And that's the point as well. We don't have a lot of people reading them, and we have to move to that particular place where people are reading the manifestos, people are holding people accountable based on the manifesto. It's very important.
I had a chance, Lloyd, to look at a paper that you co-authored a couple of years ago, where you raise the question of internet voting. Was that a serious academic pursuit, or was that academic frolic?
No, it was an academic curiosity. We wanted to find out whether or not if it was a matter of apathy as against a matter of convenience.
But in the paper you say that convenience was not a major factor in determining.
No, it wasn't. It was so that we wanted to explore to see whether or not convenience would have contributed to participation. But we found that that's not the case. That even if the option is given to vote, persons are not going to take it. So people use the internet as an extension of themselves. Yes. So if you're interested in politics, certainly you're going to have you'll be online on Twitter listening to politics, reading about politics. If you're interested in music, that's what you do. If you're interested in fashion, you'll see that persons will like and comment on stuff that they identify with.
Yes.
And what we did find, however, from a separate study, that in an instance of national fervor where there is a kind of bandwagoning around a particular instance or matter, there is a moment of conversation where persons step out of their usual ecosystem and may comment or like on, and this is another article coming out, they may comment and like on politics, but that does not mean, but it's just temporary. We call it trans-temporal, right? It's just a particular time and space, but this does not mean that it triggers behavior on their part.
In terms of voting.
Yeah.
Is there any other thing that you're looking at now that you're engaged in that would help us deal with this conundrum?
Yes, so now we're about to do a study looking at political ideology. And so the general argument is that there's no political ideology anymore. And again, those are assumptions. So what we want to look at is looking at the different tenets of each political ideology and, throwing them out there and asking persons to identify with these different tenets.
To what extent, before we wrap up, to what extent, as you mentioned the question of ideology, to what extent has that been superseded by concern about transparency, integrity, issues of governance? Are those the things that are influencing people in terms of who they vote for or whether they vote any at all?
Well, we don't know, because we've never actually provided that. We've never actually explored that until now. So, of course, issues of governance are also conversations about ideology, because we certainly need to find out how people feel about accountability, who should be accountable, who shouldn't be accountable, how people feel about transparency, what type of transparency, so which are the bedrock of corruption. So, and issues of good governance, and then how people feel about good governance, participation, inclusion. Again, these are, as much as people don't realize, they are actually ideological conversations. And you ask to what end? From that, if we can map certain principles, let's call them principles, and if we find that Mr. Golding has 9 of 20 principles, and the 9 of 10 principles, and the 9 of the 10 principles are principles, let's say, of Ryan capitalism, right? Which is a kind of social kind of capitalism. Then we could make an assumption that collectively, if all of these people say that they're going to vote for Party X, but at the same time they all believe in the principles of Ryan capitalism, not that they themselves knew that they believe in it, but they just believe in a set of principles that when you collectively look at them, they say Ryan capitalism, then we can literally reverse engineer and determine what exactly is it that people are voting for on one hand, but more importantly, even though we say that both parties don't have an ideology, is that actually the case?
And what you're assuring me is that the department remains engaged in trying to help us better understand these issues.
Yes.
Yeah.
We just finalized another major study just quickly on looking at the future of Jamaica. We can come and talk to you about that, but we looked at the impact of COVID on work from home, learning, entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Whether or not persons would change jobs and start with a new job. And so we looked at that particular aspect. So we just got the data set now. We are actually just about to start writing the report. So we will be happy to come and have a conversation about the findings.
Sure. Thank you very much, Lloyd.
You're welcome.
Dr. Lloyd Waller, professor at the Department of Government at University of the West Indies. Thank you so much.
Take care.
We want we're going to get another perspective now, and it's an important one. We're going to be talking to Mr. Kevin O'Brien Chang, who is a very successful businessman, but also a very enlightened and one may say perceptive public commentator, and someone who has shared with the Jamaican people his views on a range of issues such as the one we're discussing now. Kevin, do I have you on the line?
Hello, Mr. Golding.
Yes. Thank you very much.
I must say it's very pleasing to hear that you're sharing your wisdom with the Jamaican people. I don't know about the show, but you're how should I put our eminence greases of eminence greases.
Well, I'm sharing my thoughts, and I'm raising questions too, which is what we're doing today, because each week we take a topic and we try to delve into it to see if we can get a better understanding. And what we've been talking about today is the increasingly low voter turnout. Almost every election, a smaller percentage of the registered voters are voting. And we're trying to see if we can understand what is the cause of it. We recognize that it is not peculiar to Jamaica. It's a global phenomenon, but it is particularly severe here in Jamaica. So we want to see if we get a better feel as to what is causing it. And secondly, is it something that we really ought to be worked up about, or is it just a natural evolving political response from people, especially since, we're out of the turbulent politics of the 60s, the Black Power civil rights struggle in America, the liberation of Africa, the kind of things that worked us up and caused us to be politically engaged. That is not really the situation today. So is it something that we ought not to concern? Yes, but don't get frightened about it. And is it something that we can turn around? Can we change it? Is there anything that we could do so that in the next election we see the turnout going back up to 60-something, and hopefully after that up to 70-something? What are your thoughts?
Well, first let me caveat this, that you're a man who has been there, done that in the system, right? And we are the outside chatting with loose talk. It's much easier to talk than to do. So I talk without any knowledge of the inner battles and struggles of the realities, So I'm caveating with this. So maybe some of the stuff I say, yeah, that sounds easy, but the reality is tougher, and you've been there. But my thing is, there's an 800-pound elephant in the room, which for some reason people hardly ever want to allude to. I called up to Mr. Johnson. He mentioned it briefly about the emigration poll on the 3% said crime. But I've been following politics in Jamaica. I came back from school in 89 and started following it a little bit. Probably started seriously about 2000, 97, so forth. And every single poll, almost every single poll I've seen, was the number one concern? Crime. Occasionally things pop up, like the COVID or the jobs. But 95% of those polls I've seen, the number one issue is crime, right? And I came to Jamaica with 400 murders in 89 when I came back. I saw it go to 1,600 in 2007. 16 years, right? And it's dropped a little, it's 1,300 now, but we have the highest murder rate on the planet, Jamaica. I know that the commission yesterday, one of the top 5, If you look at the stats, Jamaica has the highest murder rate in the world. We're at 48 per 100,000. Latin America, which is the most violent region in the world, is 16 per 100,000. Our crime murder rate is off the charts. And yet, I have never seen a crime ad in Jamaica during an election. In fact, no, I saw one once, 2002, I believe it was. Peter Phillips had this, he was talking. Crime is too important to be made a political football, right? Now, you have the number one issue in Jamaica. People talk of it up over and over.
Kevin.
I think the campaign
Kevin. Mm-hmm. Having problem hearing you. Your line seems to be.
The Because
Can you hang up and let us call you back?
No problem.
Hang up. We're going to call you back right now. Try and get a better line. We've been talking to Mr. Kevin O'Brien Chang, businessman and public commentator. And what he's suggesting is that maybe one of the things that accounting for the low voter turnout is the issue of crime and the fact that people may feel dissatisfied that neither of the governments that succeed each other have been able to effectively address that issue. I don't know whether that is I don't know to what extent that accounts for the precipitous fall. And I mention that because I remember during the 80s, for example, certainly the murder level remained fairly constant. We had like 400 and odd murders a year. That's after the 1980 situation where we had over 800. But a good chunk of that 800 was, about 300-400 of it had to do with political violence. We had a fairly consistent number of about 400 murders a year, and that remained so in the 1980s, but there was still, every election, less and less people were coming out to vote. Kevin, are you back on the line?
Yeah, I'm here now, yeah.
Good, that's a much better line. Yeah, you were talking about crime
yes,
as a factor.
Well, as I say, it's the biggest factor that people are talking about the poll show. And yet never a single campaign crime ad, which is only showing that both parties are avoiding the issue. Now, I'm going to give you my take. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but this is my take on how I've seen it. I remember 2007 very well. Covered 8.5 years of PNP, so there's a critical election for Jamaica. And I remember Labour people come and talk to me. You know, people ask me what you think and all that. I said, well, all I hear people talking about is crime, and I can't say a crime ad for the JLP. Murder has gone up from 400 to 1,600 under the PNP, 8.5 years, and the JLP cannot roll a single crime ad. I said, you guys are going to lose the election of crime, because that's all I hear people want. Where's the crime plan? Nothing. Not a single crime ad was run. Okay? That's the first data point I put in.
Yeah, but losing election is one thing. What is causing people not to vote?
Hold on, no. Because nobody wants to address the people of an issue they want to talk about, and nobody talking about it. Let me give you my other data points, right? The 2010 election, SOE, which you yourself called, right? Murder plummeted by 40%. The polls are saying that 71% of Jamaicans wanted the SOE continued. For whatever reasons, I'm not any inside source, I'm not criticizing, it was discontinued. Okay? 2011.
Because under the Charter of Rights amendment, it required bipartisan support in
31%. Yes, well, as I say, I'm going to give it the public view. We want this thing, it get voted down. Right? That's the public things very crudely. All right? 2011, Andrew Hornet's inauguration, I was there. He said, let's break down the walls of exclusion, big speech. Mrs. Simpson Miller walking me hand in hand through the garrisons, right? A poll was taken after that. 82% wanted to walk. Books, no walk. We don't hear nothing more about walk. Nobody talked about it. All right? And 2011 election again. I remember it well. Don, this was the GLP's best accomplishment. The crime was number one by far. Again, not a single crime had by the GLP. Okay? All right? 2011 SOE. Come again. Right? Crime book drop. Polls come out. 71 to 90% of the people want SOE continued. Book SOE stop. So my thesis is that the public is saying, look, this is what we want. We want this. We can't get it. Why bother vote? Neither party will give you what you want.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. I hear your point.
Well, I'm going to say this. I'm going to further point. I talk to people a lot on the ground. They come to me and talk to me on here, and I listen. And it always struck me, the difference between what the people on the ground are saying compared to what the politicians are talking about. What politicians talk about a lot is not what the people who want to be talking about. And crime is the biggest one by far. But that, I've always said to the people, there's a huge disconnect here.
the weekend I looked at not many. It was not academic research, but I tried to see if I could identify a correlation between the provision of good services to a community. You know, the bad roads that we've had to put up with for a long time were finally fixed. A new school was built. Things like that. To see, let me see if the election that came after that saw any greater turnout in voters, in the percentage of people voting. And there was no correlation. So I keep asking myself the question, why are people increasingly not voting, even when things that they used to claim before is the reason why they don't vote? Those things have been addressed to some extent, but they're still not voting in any significant numbers.
But sir, come back to the point. The number one issue of the people is crime. I mean, there's no question. And yet, nobody talks about it. Nobody addresses it. As I say, no crime ad. And the state of emergency the people want. Let me put it to you this way. Democracy is supposed to be positive. The people think long and hard on something, the politicians do it. I mean, you can have the things that come upon them, but a long time people have been saying the same thing. This SOE, since 2010, people have been saying, we want this. They don't get it. It start, it stop. Now, if I find the system totally unresponsive to my needs and my wishes, why should I bother to vote?
But in some countries, they behave differently. In the Bahamas, for example, when they vex with you, when they vex about what is happening or what is not happening, they vote. They make sure they vote.
But I put this to you, sir. I'll come back. The issue the people have said for consistently is number one is this, and neither party won't even run an ad about it. So people say, well, neither party interested in doing in dealing with my issue, which is crime. PNP, GLP, when it comes to crime, no better herring, no better barrel. Why kill myself upon vote when neither of them going to do anything I want? I think that, in my view, there are other issues, there are other things, but I believe that the single biggest fundamental problem that people have.
What role does
working a democracy should work?
What role does governance issues play in it in terms of transparency, corruption, integrity, that kind of thing? I go by
the polls, sir. I'm a believer in polls. I'm a big believer because my little one talking to 5 people not going to give them what Jamaica is thinking. And I come back to the point. Consistently for 30 years, by far the number one issue is crime. They said yes, they're relevant. But the people are saying, no, yes, but it's the important one to us is crime, and nobody wants to talk about it. This is what we want dealt with above everything else. Above everything else, we want to feel safe. That's the number one issue. I want to feel safe, and especially the women. A lot of the women emigrate to Canada and all that because they feel a lot safer, but especially for women. And I can't feel safe, and nobody's trying to make me safe. So why should I emigrate? Why would I try to vote? Nobody's going to make me feel safe.
I'm not going to beat down your point, but I'm still not sure that we're making a proper connection. And I say that because there are countries that have significant levels of crime.
Nowhere near to Jamaica, sir. Nowhere near to Jamaica.
There are some
Venezuela, which country in Latin America has crime near Jamaica?
Kevin, there are some that are very near to Jamaica. And yet, their people vote. They take voting seriously.
The ones near us are dysfunctional. So I'll give you the ones near us. Venezuela, dysfunctional. Honduras, El Salvador, they're barely functioning democracies. No functioning, mature. And Jamaicans, I'll give us this, we are one of the most stable democracies on the planet. We've never had a challenge to the system, coup, revolution, assassination, anything like that. But none of them functioning are close to us. The murder rates close to us are dysfunctional countries. We are the only one. So I mean, look at our peers. Trinidad was close to us one time. They've cut it down to about half of us. Barbados is about 1/4, right? As I say, they have crime, but not in the same way. Our murder rate is an outlier. You're looking at it against the CARICOM countries. Any other functioning? We don't understand how. as I say, unusual it is.
How profound a problem is low voter turnout in Jamaica?
It is a very worrying problem.
Is it something that is undesirable but not undermining, or is it something that could cause serious problems for our democracy?
Well, I have two views on this. If you look on the stats, right, and I have said this before, so I'm talking out of two mouths here. I'd like to say higher, but if you look at the stats from age 62, about 30% of the population has voted. And the last election, it dropped a bit, but it was COVID, 20% below the one previously. But we're about 30% for the longest while. We have, despite what has frightened people, I tell you this, and this is where the math, people need to understand the math a little better. They're judging it off the registration cards, how many people have registered to vote. But if you look on that has increased dramatically, far above the population or anything, because people want the voter cards to use as ID.
Yes,
they don't necessarily want them to vote. But if you look at the percentage of the population, and I've done studies on this, I have a chart, it's pretty consistent in 62, 30%. In fact, we are higher in not 2020, because that is a COVID election. About 20% of people stayed home, I believe. 2016, the percent of people who voted of the population is higher than the previous two elections.
Are you sure about that?
I'll dig up the chart. Yeah, man. I can dig up the chart, and I'll send it to you. WhatsApp, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, sure.
So I can email or WhatsApp it to you.
I'd love to look at those, because I'd be a little reassured.
No, we're looking at the wrong number. We're looking at the number that frightens people is percentage of registered voters has been plummeting.
Yes.
As I say, that's not fair, because the registered voters, a lot of them are young people, are not interested in voting. They don't want the card. Young people don't vote, I hear this all the time, but the young people, until people reach 25, 30, they're busy looking their girlfriend or boyfriend or wife or husband. That's their main concern. They don't think of politics till they have a child, maybe, and we have a future.
Kevin, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for adding.
As an email, all right?
Yeah, good. Thank you so much.
Cool. All right.
All right, getting into the final leg now of Jamaica Live, Bridge 99. Forgot to bring in the people in New York, so let me just hail them up as we go to the break, and we hail them up again when they come back. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with me. This is Jamaica Live on Bridge 99, and we are broadcasting not only here, but broadcasting through to New York through Irish Jam, and I just want to greet all the Jamaicans in that part of the diaspora who I know continue to have and maintain such keen interest in what is happening backyard, as they say. Today we focused our discussions, our thinking on the question of Jamaica's consistent and worsening low voter turnout in elections, where even before COVID we were down now to just under 50%. More people are staying home on election day than the people who are voting. Now, we have to be careful with the numbers, because one of the points that we looked at, and again when we were talking with Kevin O'Brien Chang a short while ago, a lot more people are registering to vote now, a greater percentage of eligible people, that is people who are over 18 years old. A lot more are registering now than used to happen in the past, because the voter ID card is highly regarded, widely accepted. So a lot of people are registering now primarily to get their voter ID card. That wasn't so, 25, 30 years ago. So at that time, when you look at the people who were coming out to vote, it was a higher percentage of the registered voters, because that list of registered voters has gone up so much, because many people are registering to get the ID card. So it's important for the academics and the pollsters and so on to really look at it and drill down those numbers, so that maybe we're beating up ourselves over something that is not quite as bad as it really is. And as I indicated before, declining voter turnout is not peculiar to Jamaica. It's happening throughout the Caribbean, happening throughout the world, where the average voter turnout in elections globally has fallen from 70-odd% 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, to 60-odd% now. We must be concerned when ours fall below 50%, because even if some of that is due to the fact that more people are registering, it still suggests to me that there are an increasing cohort of people in Jamaica who just can't bother vote, have no interest in voting. Not that they don't have any interest in politics, because they chat a whole heap of politics, public issues, but in terms of participating, and we need to find out why. We're going to be joined now by Mrs. Donna Parchment Brown, who is the Political Ombudsman, who, because of her mandate, because of her responsibilities, has to keep a keen eye on elections, voter behavior, and the kind of things that influence voter behavior. And I'm pleased to welcome her to the program. Mrs. Parchment Brown? Do we have her online? Thought
yes,
we did.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you now. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for the invitation, and congratulations on your new show.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
What? Why are so many Jamaicans who are registered to vote? Why are so many of them not voting?
After the general election, September 3rd, 2020, the Office of the Political Ombudsman hosted some consultations and issued a report which dealt with people's comments on the campaign and some issues like the one you've raised. So we had a wide range of participants from civil society, academia, young people, the JCF, and other stakeholders in Jamaica. And talking about the democratic involvement of citizens by way of the vote, they flagged certain issues. Where they join in being a bit disquieted at the downward trend. They think there's a lack of respect for the system called Jamaica, and that there's a perception that the integrity around campaigning is not what it should be. That some Jamaicans were quite disaffected with the process of political engagement. They also had the COVID-19 risk, and they felt that the political parties in their campaigning had failed to stimulate the interest of youth and other electors, and that the campaigning, as they experienced it, seemed to be targeted more to those persons who are already members of the organization, so to the supporters of the political parties. So those were some of the reasons they put forward for the low turnout.
Well, let us spend some time, Donna. Let us spend some time and look at that and try and see if we can even drill down some more.
Right.
Were you able to get a sense of the extent to which people's expectations were unreasonable, or the extent to which those expectations were jolly well reasonable? It is just that the governments and the politicians did not make sufficient effort to respond to them. I raised that, you see, because in the discussions we've been having today, one of the things that Don Anderson pointed out in his discussion with me this morning is that there's an increasing number of voters who have adopted a transactional approach to voting. They have a dollar figure on their vote. And by transactional, I'm not even just talking about those who are prepared to accept money for voting. But I have come across people who say they're not voting because they didn't get the house that they wanted to get. Even though many people, and more people than in the past, were getting houses, they didn't get the one that they wanted for them own self, or they didn't get the job. Never mind that Statin has said that, unemployment is going down and so many jobs were created. People don't seem to be making a judgment based on this broad thing about an assessment of what is being done. They're talking about what is being done for me. Is that something you have found?
There is some of that, but I don't think that's the overwhelming experience that I've had or that I've heard from the group. For me, the overwhelming thing I'm hearing from Jamaicans, and certainly out of these consultations, is that what difference does it make? We're dissatisfied with what they deliver. Yes, in terms of roads, water, sewage, electricity in certain areas, and dealing with the issues that confront young people and the issues that confront the poor.
But if they are dissatisfied,
yes,
why not vote to express that dissatisfaction?
Right. Well, we don't know if those who voted may be voting to express that, but those who did not vote may have no, well, what are they saying? Lack of confidence in the system's ability to do what is needed to be done for Jamaicans. So maybe needing the political actors to re-engage in a different way with the Jamaican people, in the sense that a lot of the engagement is based on support of Party A or Party B. So there's a view that if you express an opinion on certain things, you are then labeled. Okay, so this reduces the ability of public consultation, public discourse, and a sense that the voice of the public matters to those who may be elected to political office. And that's reflected, in a sense, in their view of the campaign messages, because what was expressed is that the campaign messages don't target, apparently, the needs and concerns of the public. Also, the campaign messages come out late, days before voting. So that says to some of these participants, it's almost meaningless. They would not expect the ordinary Jamaican or the average Jamaican or even the highly privileged and educated Jamaican to have the time to assess what manifestos are saying and what you intend to do if there is no analysis of what you did before and there's not enough time for people to discuss and understand what you say you're proposing. So, people were pretty clear about also a lack of what we would call good civic education. And in fact, that was a big recommendation that we're working on, that there has to be a way that Jamaicans become more knowledgeable about what different institutions are available to serve them, what different institutions can do, because there's a way in which we're now always calling on the Prime Minister or calling on the Leader of the Opposition or calling on the MP. But a government, a country, is much more than the political representative. So if one doesn't understand how the rest of it works and how to access it, then maybe you just get turned off.
Did you find that these sentiments are bunched up in any particular age cohort?
It's difficult for me to assess that because we were very careful to have a very diverse participant group. And I feel as if those views were expressed across the board. There may have been other priorities for different groups, like the older groups, they have had more experience of politics and had less need of civic education, while the younger ones had more need of civic education. But across the board, people felt like manifestos came out too late. They were not looking to really allow the public to understand the offers. They did not include any comment on how well we have done or not done before, and therefore why, as an individual MP, I should come on. And just to add, there was also a thought that apart from the party manifestos, every candidate should have a manifesto, something that says to the constituents in that area who you are, what you stand for, and what are the projects or activities that you mean to work on.
But Donna,
yes,
how many of the voters out there really interested in that? I mean, even if the parties had put out manifestos 3 months before election, a lot of people who get those manifestos, they roll it up and take it cash table foot. They're not reading it.
No, but you would talk about it on your program, and so your listeners would get an insight.
Yeah, but
they're not saying necessarily they have to read it, but it would be in the public domain and allow for some level of non-party discourse on the different manifestos.
No, what I want to ask you is whether the problem is deeper than that. In other words, whether people have their fingers in their ears. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear enough politics. Nobody tell me about what you're going to do. Nobody tell me what you have done. I'm sick and tired of the whole owner.
Well, I think that's definitely a part of the mix. That's a definite part of the mix. But I didn't get a sense that people were hopeless or they were giving up on Jamaica or they didn't believe the democratic process could work or that they had a role in it. But that really they were not inspired. They were not engaged. And also they had some upset over different issues that were in the public domain to do with, infighting in people's groups or corruption allegations or the sense that vote buying was something that put a finger on the scale already anyway. So there are those issues that came out that people are concerned about. Notwithstanding, they still seem to want more from the candidate.
We have today a reasonable expansion of civil society organizations. I mean, I keep booking up ones that I didn't hear about before. To what extent has that growth in civil society activism, to what extent has that prevented the problem from getting worse, or to what extent has that in fact encouraged the phenomenon we see now? Because I find that maybe for the reason that you mentioned earlier, many of these civil society organizations don't even want to have a discussion about politics because they're afraid of being labeled.
Yes, because I would have said my sense is that there is less activism now than there was 10 years ago. But there may be new organizations out there who are sort of focused on certain topics, whether it's the environment or, something like that everyone can coalesce around, but not so much around issues of governance. For that, I'm only seeing JAM and maybe one or two others. And so the commissions of parliament, for example, and the accountant general provide some of the content that relates to governance issues. So I think there's less voice on a lot of topical issues than we might have had, for example, when you were in the parliament. And I think that is tied to the labeling issue. But we can't give up on that because the overriding thing is that we're not satisfied. We're a bit disengaged. COVID was not so good for us, but we're not the worst place in the world. We're not doing so badly. So it wasn't a beating up Jamaica is hopeless, away with Jamaica kind of attitude. But here are some suggestions, recommendations, and thoughts that if the political parties were willing to listen to the electors, they may, in fact, make some changes that would benefit them and would benefit Jamaica.
We're coming to the end of the program, but let me put a question to you. To what extent? A lot of political reaction
yes,
is really a means of people expressing themselves.
True.
Because they feel that there's a need, there's an urge to. To what extent has all the calling programs that we have, and even more than the calling program, social media now? I can go on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and I can reel off all kind of things, and I can even lace it with some expletives. And when I finish, I feel good. I have let off my steam. So I don't have to bother go and argue with no politician because I have done what I wanted to do to make me feel a little better. I don't have to bother vote either. I just voted on Instagram. I let them know what I think.
This is a problem. I think the digital space has been a great blessing for us, but many have used it to harm one another and to harm democracy. And this is something I'd raised with the political parties from as long ago as 2018, because there were a number of issues related to supporters of parties using that space in a way that didn't help the party or help the other side or help the country. So that's something I think that political parties also have to find a way to better engage with and not just benefit from negatives because somebody else can do negatives against you. So, yes, there's a sense that people get released. But we used to have a lot of talk shows back in the day, and people have always had those platforms, not the digital space, including letters to the editor. But they still felt that there was something to vote for. And there is still a feeling that there's something to vote for, and that they're not unwilling to vote, not unwilling. But
nothing is wrong, Donna, if they feel there's something to vote against.
Absolutely.
You know?
But the political parties, I mean, it was very strong that they felt political parties campaigning in the last election was not up to par, and they realized there were issues that impacted that, but that the content of the campaign, and that they also saw a lot of people breaching their own rules and regulations for political purposes. They saw people who put out stories about wrongful acts which turned out not to be true, and they pursued those, notwithstanding. So, and there's also the issue of the disunity and the corruption claim. So they felt legitimate reasons not to want to be there then, but that doesn't mean that they don't want to be there ever, right? So that they see the work of civic education, greater interaction between the ombudsman and the political parties. They don't like to see us at odds. They want to see us working together for the goals set out in the code.
I'm out of time, but thanks for joining me, Mr. Donna Parchment Brown, Political Ombudsman. Thank you, Donna. Thank you for
having me.
bringing value to our discussion today. We've been talking about voter participation, the low level of voter participation, what can be done, how serious a problem it is, what causes it. I hope it has stirred some thinking among my listeners. I want to once again hail up the people in New York through Irish Jams. Thanks for tuning in to Jamaica Live. We'll be back next week Monday when we will take on another issue, dive into it, and try and see if we can improve understanding. Thanks to my producer, Tamar Campbell, my studio engineer. Thanks to everybody who helps to make this program possible. God bless you. See you next week Monday.